The Fae and the Hunter by T.E.Mountain. Chapter 1. Grind. Reinhardt stepped gingerly through the labyrinth sewers that ran under the grand old city of Lundea, his balance only slightly hampered by the hand he had clamped over his nose. He did so to avoid the rotten stench emanating from the sewage that ran beside the walkway he was on. The hand's effectiveness was considerably lower than he would have liked. He could taste the filth as much as smell it. He could virtually hear it. When he'd signed up with the Hunters Guild, this was not what he had imagined. The desk for registration had glorious illustrations of proud knights, replacent in armor riding into battle against vile fire-spitting behemoths. He'd imagined riches, carousing with the exotic fae, being knighted and celebrated. And in fairness, all that could be true, if, the big if, you were particularly good at it. Beyond good, really. Exceptional. Unfortunately, Reinhardt was not. Reinhardt was okay at it. Middling at it. Generously, he might have described himself as competent, even on a good day. Taking the dangerous, glamorous jobs when you were only decent was an excellent way to end up dead, he had quickly realized. Even for the good hunters, it was 50-50. So these were the jobs the middling hunters got. The less glamorous ones, the unpleasant ones. At the point that he had realized this, he might as well have quit the post altogether. But what the smiling, chatty representatives who signed them up had glossed over was the cost of hunting. First, there was the mildly extortionate fee for the license that allowed you to hunt officially on behalf of the guild. That was essential because freelancers tended to go missing. Then there was the fee for weapons license and mandatory training the guild made you go through, and the inflated cost for renting the equipment you couldn't afford to buy outright, along with a dozen other necessities, like provisions for travel. Helpfully, the guild didn't take the money up front. They deducted a fee from the payment of every bounty you handed in, a substantial fee. So Reinhardt had neither the money for provisions nor the skill for the big-paying jobs that might wipe his debt. That left the lesser jobs, the low-grade bounties, the ones that left him scarcely a handful of copper beggars after each hunt. If he was lucky, maybe a silver noble or two, barely enough to keep afloat. At the rate that he was going, it would take him 500 years to pay off his outstanding balance. He hadn't dared look at it for some time, but last he checked, it had been approaching a couple hundred gold crowns. That was close to buying a house money, or in his case, owning a house money. It was hard to keep motivated in a job that he barely muddled through, and he had spent too long lounging and squandering the little spare he had left, till he had no choice but to take the first quickest job that he could get. So here he was, in the city, in the sewer, underground, hunting a set of brownies who had blocked the drainage pipe. Using his free hand to hold up the small lantern he unclipped from his belt, he surveyed the water being a generous description, and saw that it was lower ahead. Creeping along and lifting the lantern, he saw movement in the dim gloom. Faintly, he heard the unmistakable noise of brownies, a screeching, nonsensical chattering. Their low, misshapen bodies stood out in the gloom as they packed their nest with gleefully pilfered goods. They had managed to scavenge cutlery, a jug, and what looked to be someone's underwear from what he could make out. They were dim-witted, gangly creatures, but quick. He could dimly make out that there were 5 or 6 of them, and he very much hoped to be able to corner them and at least get a few before they had a chance to flee. He was unlikely to get all of them, but he needed at least 3 to call it a good day's work. The brownies were stupid and unsettling, but ultimately they were just pests, more nuisances than a genuine threat. Reinhardt didn't quite have the sustained, unyielding hatred for anything and everything magical that some of the esteemed colleagues in the Hunters Guild did, and the guild taking virtually everything that he earned didn't exactly help his motivation. The imminent threat of starvation, however, did. Consequently, as a fresh surge of stench hit him as he let go of his nose, he felt past the knife on his belt and instead pulled out a small cudgel. He'd knocked them out and dropped them off somewhere outside the city limits. Luckily, the one advantage of his lack of importance was that the guild didn't exactly do much follow-up work, and they'd practically take him at his word. If he took their horns, that would be enough proof for the guild that he had dispatched of them. He crept slowly forward, keeping as quiet as he could. The brownies were still virtually oblivious to his presence, and they scampered on their gangly limbs, sharp little teeth glinting in the light. The tunnel ahead had a fence of iron bars, the bottom half solid, with no gaps. The brownie nest also sat, built like a dam across the gate, blocking the grating that would have otherwise let through a steady supply of water, cutting its flow to barely a trickle. Reinhardt peered into the gloom past the gate, and his heart nearly jumped from his chest. Stood behind them, dimly lit by a lantern of his own, was another figure. A human. To his side was an iron bar jutting out from the wall that Reinhardt couldn't quite make out in the shadows. The mystery person was covered nearly head to toe in dark fabric, a cloth wrapped around his face, presumably a somewhat better solution to the stench than Reinhardt's admittedly ill-conceived one. Reinhardt couldn't make out his features, but he recognized the smug voice that spoke to him. "Reinhardt?" the human asked in a surprised voice. Reinhardt put his fingers to his lips and glanced at the brownies. The last thing he needed was them fleeing. Fortunately, they seemed so enamored by their chatter that they were oblivious to the fact that they were effectively surrounded. Slinking as close as he dared, Reinhardt whispered back, Yeah, it's me. Why are you here, Harrent?" "Rumor has it there are brownies around here. You haven't seen them, have you?" Reinhardt glanced down at them. His rival might not have been able to see them at such an angle, but their chatter was loud enough that he had to have heard them. "Maybe. I have it covered, though." "Yeah? You sure you don't need help? Might be a bit much for a D-rank hunter." Help. As if the man had any interest in helping. By Devana's name, Reinhardt hated him. He wanted to punch him in his smug face. Instead, he answered, "I think that I can manage, thank you," he forced through gritted teeth. While a hunter signed their name to proclaim that they had taken a bounty, technically nothing stopped multiple hunters from taking the same contract. With longer jobs, the idea someone had a head start on you, and you might be wasting weeks, tended to stop people from taking duplicate contracts. With such a small job, though, all that was left as a barrier was common courtesy. This was in short supply. Heron had stolen more bounties from him than he could count. That wasn't going to happen this time, though. The spoils went to whoever claimed them first, and overt violence between hunters was prohibited, so all Reinhardt had to do was grab them before Heron could find a way around him. "Well, I was going to suggest splitting the bounty, but if you insist on competing," Heron said, almost managing to sound regretful. Reinhardt thought it was more likely that he was about to be crowned king of Bretea. Reinhardt thought that it was more likely that he was about to be crowned king of Bretea than any hunter willingly sharing a bounty, let alone one who hated him. "Yeah? Well, you're on the wrong side of the bars there," Reinhardt gloated. "So it looks like I win this one already." "That'd be a first," Heron snorted. Disconcertingly, he didn't sound concerned. "But I have a better weapon than you." "Yeah? What's that?" "I checked the layout of the sewer," he said, taking hold of the iron handle. "And I know what a sluice gate is. More importantly, I know that you open it on this side." There was a creak of rusty iron as he pulled the bar. The bar, as Reinhardt shortly learned, was a lever to the floodgate that Heron stood behind. A stream came through as the gate started to creak open behind the brownies' dam, beginning to wash it away from the bottom up. It battered Reinhardt's legs, and as he staggered back with the current, barely keeping his balance. With a laugh as he held the lever for purchase, Heron stooped down through the now open floodgate and flung the net across the top of the startled brownies now collapsing home, catching all of them in one go. With a wink, he pulled the lever the rest of the way. The sewage took its newfound freedom in earnest and rushed forth, a torrent of black ooze, with an involuntary howl that filled his mouth with something putrid beyond mention. Reinhardt bowled over into the now rapid flow. He caught his last glimpse of the triumphant Heron's hand merrily waving goodbye to him before he was carried away by the deluge of filth, along with his hopes of claiming the bounty that he so desperately needed.